Well, Ron, Matt, we're here for
Here.
this week's installment of Figuring It Out. I think the inspiration for this one, I'll give a little bit of background, was we deal with clients all the time that have us do security services. We've lived multiple lives as assessors and pen testers, so we've either done or seen probably hundreds, if not thousands, of reports in our time. And I think a common theme is someone gets the assessment and then we come back next year and a lot of the same findings are still there. And in 2020, it sounds crazy, but guess what? It still happens. I was talking with some of our team literally last week where they're like, yeah, you know, 15 out of 20 findings haven't been touched, and this is like, it's all new news to them. So folks, this happens. So the inspiration for this was, you get the report, what now, right? What the heck do I do next as, not as a consultant, but as Mr. and Miss Customer, what's going to be effective for taking the effort that went into that, both in terms of dollars and all your people, and getting something out of it. And for me, it's pretty simple. Accountability. At a high level, that's what it all boils down to. But I know, Ron, you had said there's a couple layers to that accountability, things like assigning tasks and project management element of it.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I think we initially saw, and I say initially because, we've been doing this as BTB for 14 years, but I mean, even just in the industry overall, I think a lot of people struggled sort of like after the assessment part. It was like, how do we prioritize what's come out of this assessment to make sure that we're, taking off the low-hanging fruit, and then also giving ourselves a basis for, future discussions or how we handle these things. And for the longest time, it was, kind of checking the box, right? It was like, well, we did an assessment or whatever. And then the next year, we would have clients that you would come back and do another assessment or a different type of assessment. You start to ask them the same questions. They're like, oh yeah, well, we didn't remediate that yet, or we're getting to it, or it's on a plan. Now there's been such a good focus on following up with that, but vendors need to be, and it's us too. We need to be able to give better information to help our clients. So it's not just about, high, medium, or low risk, but then it's also, well, what are the resources actually required to accomplish this so that you can project manage it to completion. Now, I think some of the bigger struggles that people are having are not just getting it completed, but then how's it fit into the overall security organization? Years back, it was, this is the basis and this is how we're going to build our plan and our organization around it. Now, I think we see a lot more. It's, how are we trending? Like, what's this mean to our overall security posture? And how is this change, or how does this assessment promote and support what our goals are and actually demonstrate that our posture has changed in a positive way? And it's interesting, but I think a lot of people are struggling with it because they don't know. They're still just kind of doing the assessments that are being told to them that they need to be doing, right? There's not a lot of plan that's involved in that.
They're doing it because they have to, customer driven, compliance driven, regulatory driven, whatever. Good, kudos, do that. But you're wasting, to a certain extent, some resources here. And let's get specific, right? This isn't rocket science. There's some awesome tools that you could use, but all it really takes is like an Excel spreadsheet. You just put like the punch list, resources assigned and accountable, budgetary estimates, or whatever. Make someone accountable. Let's start there, because that, I think, is the thing we, when folks make zero or little progress, that's the number one failure, is there's just no accountability. And whether you're bubbling that up to your board, that's up to you, right? I don't know. That's for the board to decide whether or not they want to go to that level. But at a minimum, be accountable yourself. Set 30, 60, 90, 6 months, set some milestones out there and report back on progress. Trust me, in whatever role you're in, your boss is going to appreciate you saying, hey, we had this done in July 2020. It's now October. Look at what we've done. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, and also just to justify that continued improvement on the security organization side, it's not just about showing the kind of progress that you've made in terms of the posture of the organization, but then also justifying going to that next level of depth. right? You may be covering yourself because you're looking at logs, but then what's the next best thing that you need to be doing? It's having a plan to take action on those logs to make sure that you're adequately responding to them, right? We talk about that all the time, but then on the assessment side, you know, we talk about, and a lot of people talk about this defense in depth and kind of layering your approach to security and making sure that you're kind of checking the boxes on all those things. And you're providing adequate security and assessing your infrastructure and your applications to kind of support that. We see it all the time, right? People do an assessment, a threat and vulnerability assessment or a risk assessment, and they do a pen test. And then the next year, what do? Some of them jump back right on and they start cycling through a threat and vulnerability assessment pen test. And then we have companies whose business actually hinge upon a specific application or some type of integration, and they get it. They take that next level and they say, okay, we've gotten the high level. We understand the organization. We've done the stress testing with the penetration testing piece. Now the next level down, kind of getting into the weeds, is that application or integration testing to make sure that even very specifically, and those are the cases that I think a lot of times require more justification because you are getting very specific and it's, you know, it's past that outer crunchy shell, right? But ultimately, those are the types of things that trip people up. And quite honestly, those are typically the areas that once we get those assessment results to our clients, they look at and they say, these are a lot harder to try to remediate because they're so core to our business that they're going to require change that we have to look at opportunistically with new versions or require major overhaul or development efforts. So it needs to be in that mix and kind of, you know, I guess what I'm saying when I look at this stuff is you need to have somebody quarterbacking. It's kind of like healthcare, right? You can have all these specialists, but you still need your primary physician to be able to look at the totality of what's going on and say, somebody needs to be your advocate and needs to help you make decisions from an expertise, you know, from an expert standpoint. And this is the same thing. They need to all tie together somehow.
Yeah, and I don't care if your role is a CISO. I don't care if you don't have a CISO. I don't care if you're the IT manager, if you're the IT admin, or if you're the CFO, right? Sometimes that's who we engage with, right? We're engaging all levels of InfoSec knowledge, capability, maturity within an organization. And I don't care who you are and how technical you are, you can take that and still project manage it and champion it, right? So day one, you get that, assign resources, make someone accountable. Take that prioritization that whatever the consultants gave to you, whether it's BTB or someone else, and take that to heart. Sure, you know, go after those highs and mediums, but those lows add up over time too. And as you're looking to demonstrate progress, there might be some low-hanging fruit that are easy wins. I call them morale wins, right? Sometimes it's a low risk, but it's such a low remediation effort that if you have 10 things and 4 of them are low and they're all easy to do, well, just get those 4 wins. You know, just retire those 4 wins. Show progress. People will be excited about that. And then, you know, build on that momentum because that's going to be huge for your organization. I don't care if you're technical or not. You could just be a non-technical project manager or a CFO that doesn't understand InfoSec. It's easy to do.
Yeah. I think my big takeaways for this, if we're talking post project or post assessment, is to have that plan kind of that we talked about and make sure that it's being project managed appropriately. And then the other piece is kind of the visibility, right? How are you tracking them all to make sure that you're making progress, number one, but can justify how they're all playing together to build on the security organization. And then the last part, which I know a lot of people have started to focus on, which is how are you demonstrating your security posture in your organization, you know, and how is that applicable to the business? And trust me, that is not something that's easily done, right? Demonstrating posture, because there's so many different pieces to that, but you need to have some thought in your head of how it's applicable to the business and then start modeling it towards that.
Yep. Yeah, and look, again, none of this is rocket science. I know a lot of folks that are tuning in are going to say, well, that's the obvious statement, make someone accountable, then it gets done. Okay, if it's so obvious, then why do we see it fail so many times, right? It's not a complicated thing, it's just a hard thing to do from a consistency standpoint. I think that trending over time is nice and key, but let's get you just doing the bare minimum. And then as you do that, you'll start to be able to identify trends and communicate that upwards and outwards in your organization. So I think Another thing that we kind of chatted about as we wind down is, probably some future time we should spend about how to go through an assessment, right? What your roles and responsibilities are within an assessment, how to prep for an assessment, because a lot of that can influence the effectiveness and outcomes from any kind of assessment, be it risk, threat, vulnerability, pen test. The one final thing I'll say is, while you can just use Excel, we've actually developed something internally at B2B we call Vision. It's a reporting platform, and it's built with that in mind, right? It's built there. And this isn't like a cheap plug to like sell anyone. It's just to say, like, we've tried to innovate and give folks a platform that they can track this stuff and trend it over time. So something to keep in mind. It's easy to do in Excel, but there are other tools out there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's probably a number of different ways that we can do offshoots of this discussion in terms of, what to be doing during assessment, or, potential one that I know we've covered on before is how to pick the right assessment partner, kind of, objectively give some tips and tricks on what to look for, what to ask. And to that end, even talking about frameworks and postures, I know that's what the topic is next week, which framework should you fall under, what you should be looking at to give yourself a very broad picture to make sure that it's kind of future proof, but then also give yourself a good understanding of what you look like from a risk perspective currently.
Yeah, there's a lot of them out there, ISO and NIST, and then some people, while they're not technically frameworks, people leverage regulatory requirements like PCI and HIPAA as frameworks, which they're not. We're going to spend some time on that for sure.
But we're PCI compliant, Matt.
Compliance, not security. In any case, Rob Wilkinson will be joining us next week from that. He's a relatively new add to our CISO advisory team, so it'll be good. Well, I think we did the thing. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day, and be well.